Silent Hill 2 is well renowned for having some of the most well thought out and purposeful enemies that have ever graced the medium of gaming. We're not dealing with your standard zombies and skeletons in this one. Here the town of Silent Hill has some grievances with James to air out, and it's gonna shove those issues right in his face. Everything from the lying figure to the flesh lips have some form or another of symbolism for what they represent inside the very fractured mind of our protagonist. So today I thought we'd take a look at these creatures and pick out the ones that I think are the best of the best, starting first with one of the most iconic creatures to crawl out of this fog-riddled town would have to be the nurse, specifically the bubblehead nurse from this game. I didn't get into the series until the days of the collection on PS3, but even before that, I was familiar with these monsters via the movie, which, I don't care what anyone says, is still one of the best video game movies of all time. The first one. Jon Snow couldn't save the second one for me. Anyway, these entities have almost transcended the game from which they hail and permeated into the deeper zeitgeist of the series, even though they are specifically tethered to James both in the way that they look and why they act in the way that they do. According to the creature designer for the game, Masahiro Ito, which is where we get a lot of the confirmed revelations about what these creatures represent, the nurse's visuals cover a gambit of James' emotions and sins. For starters, the bubble of liquid surrounding their head is supposed to be representative of Mary's illness and how swollen she'd gotten during her hospitalization. The convulsions being a reference to James having suffocated his wife, as if they were attempting to break free of the pillow. Then, something I never realized, is that they also have a little baby face, which is supposed to represent James and Mary's desire for a child. However, while all those things are interesting, for me where this creature falls below its peers is in its gameplay. I don't dislike how the nurses function, I just don't find it to be as interesting as some of the other enemies. Their gameplay gimmick is their movement, which, while purposeful, wasn't changed much in the remake to make them more compelling to stand out. So for me, that lands this enemy at the 5th spot on this list. One of my favorite sections of the remake of this game was right before you encounter Laura in Brookhaven Hospital. Having played the original, I knew that meant we were in for a confrontation with flesh lips, and the anticipation of your first boss fight is always a peak for me. James offending Laura as she walks us back into a dark, empty room with the promise of a letter, only for her to lock us in and leave us to our fate. She, of course, doesn't know it, but she stuffed us into a fight with this abomination, and they crushed it, bringing this creature to life in the remake. Flesh Lips symbolizes an abstract view into James' thoughts of Mary during her hospitalization. The cracked, sickened skin being reminiscent of what she looked like as the disease spread, the frame the beast is caged in alluding to the prison of her hospital bed, and then the mouth. The main characteristic for which this creature is named being based off Mary's verbal attacks on her husband as the fear of her own mortality began to corrupt her personality. Although the placement of the mouth may also be suggestive of James's less than puritanical desires. In my opinion, the design, while having its reasons, isn't nearly as memorable as the impact of this being the first true boss fight. I love what they did with this monster in the remake, as they took it from being just a hanging gimmick and brought it into a multi-phase thing where it drops down to the ground as the frame breaks apart, giving it a new attack pattern. For me, it's more memorable, although it does kind of step on the toes of the final boss in some ways. But regardless, for all those reasons, Flesh Lips lands the 4th spot on this list. If we're talking about the standard enemies for this game, then there are none better realized than the mannequins. In all honesty, I don't remember a single thing about these creatures from the original, other than their existence, but in the remake, they quickly became my favorite with their inclusion of a very fun new gimmick. In this iteration of the game, these creatures are now much more stealthy, taking cues from their namesake as they'll stand like mannequins and attempt to spring out and catch you by surprise. I absolutely love this mechanic because it almost forces you to be paranoid as you wander the decaying halls of the town. These are the only enemies that don't make James' radio go off with static when you're near, which means that, unless you see them beforehand, you're gonna get a quick little jump scare when they come out legs a-swinging. Now, does it lose some of its sheen as the game goes on? Yes, but it's still by far the most engaging mechanic for the enemies to me, so I don't mind. As for what they represent, they are a manifestation of James' repressed sexual urges and cobbled memories of his wife's hospitalization. In other words, mannequins are the ultimate butterface because they don't even have one. Most of these monsters are just different interpretations of the same theme: Mary's hospitalization and James' carnal urges during her illness. For the mannequins, it focuses on her legs, as early on in her sickness, she could still walk with the use of braces. And while that's all interesting, it's the gimmick that rockets this creature up to number 3 on my list. I may get crucified for this, but I've never really been a big fan of Red Pyramid Thing, aka Pyramid Head. It's just a buff dude with some really outlandish style choices. I've always been a bigger fan of either very strange designs that have more extreme elements of body horror, or more realistic serial killer vibes. Pyramid Head, though, is a meshing of the two, and it just doesn't really work for me. However, that being said, I'd be a fool not to give this iconic creature his due. Pyramid Head is the manifestation of James' desire to punish himself. As for why he looks like a man-mountain, he seems to be based off James' honeymoon in the town, where he viewed a painting in the Historical Society of Silent Hill. The image itself being based off a local cult in the town that seems to worship a figure named Valtiel, with Pyramid Head being envisioned as a sort of executioner. He's tied more heavily into the actual location than most of these creatures, but still has meaning to James as the embodiment of his need to remember his actions and be punished for them. Lore-wise, he may arguably be the most compelling manifestation, and he's certainly one of the most prominent. We run into Pyramid Head several times throughout the course of the game, be it at the end of Woodside Apartments, or deep within the bowels of the labyrinth. He's got some of the most agency in this world, and with it, he takes it upon himself to torture the daylights out of everything that he comes into contact with. However, while he is no doubt the most recognizable monster from this game, one of the most recognizable from this entire medium, his more subdued design holds him back to number 2 for me on this list. I absolutely love the design behind the Abstract Daddy, and the more that I learn about it, the more captivating it is. Encountered in the labyrinth after a brief reunion with Angela, this creature is the bane of her nightmares and has some drastic enhancements since its debut. While the original game had only one room through which it attacks us, the remake sees an ever-expanding labyrinth of halls for the beast to chase us down, until finally we confront it in its fleshy arena. This creature is a bit difficult to relay to you in terms of what it's meant to represent, because what I initially thought it to be isn't entirely accurate. According to Masahiro Ito, what we as James encounter is not the same thing that Angela does. They are similar, I think, but James' version is filtered through abstraction because obviously he wasn't there for Angela's abuse, and thus can't accurately apply it to what he's seeing. Instead, he sees faceless figures suggestively writhing beneath a fleshy cover, framed by the same frame as Mary's hospital bed. Angela, on the other hand, is likely seeing a more accurate depiction of the sexual abuse she suffered at the hands of her father, meaning that maybe the figures are more recognizable in the bed, or maybe the beast is just her father. Who knows? This explanation solves one of the biggest issues that I've always had with the original, in that we encounter the Abstract Daddy in the Lakeview Hotel randomly after his boss fight. Now it makes more sense because it's an interpretation in James's mind and not necessarily wholly tethered to Angela. Of course, they removed it from the hotel in the remake, but still it clears up my questions from back then. As for its design, this thing just looks very interesting and unique. This game has a strangely large amount of bed monsters, but this one stands out as the king to me. Not only that, but where in the original his movements were kind of stilted, he's much more agile in the remake. His main attack being this hug thing that is very obviously suggestive of him pulling Angela onto the bed for his disturbing perversions. I love it. It's creepy, deeply symbolic, and has only been made even better by the remake. So for all those reasons, the Abstract Daddy earns the #1 spot on this list.
Okay, Angela. It's okay. Calm down.
Anyways, that's my list. What's yours? Feel free to let me know what you think in the comments down below. I should also say that I didn't include Maria on this list because I see her more as a character, even though she is technically one of the manifestations of the town. We share too many interactions with her for me to see her as a monster though. Regardless, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.